Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and this is the weekly political postbox where I just bring up a few comments that have appeared on various videos on the YouTube channel from the past week or so, and just respond to them in a way that doesn't need a whole video for each one. We do this each Monday, so I'm going to bring up the first one. Now, the first one is one where I got a load of comments like this. I'll just give one example of it, and it was based on my talking about Boris Johnson's government's notion that free movement was going to end as soon as we left the EU without a deal at, from our point of view, 11 p.m. on the 31st of October. Obviously, I said at the time, how can he even do that? Since then, various experts have said, yeah, you can't do that. So, it's not a credible threat, but it was something they were threatening. So the comment was this, says, "Hi Phil, I'm Irish. It's my understanding that the UK and Ireland are keeping the common travel agreement, which was there before both countries joined the EEC at the time." Yes, a lot of people have said this, and as if all of a sudden this prevents the ending of free movement, at least at the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. No, it doesn't. There are a few actual weird comments I had about this. First of all, people say, "Oh, you're misrepresenting the CTA." It's like, no, I'm not. I haven't even mentioned the CTA. I haven't even alluded to the CTA. No, this is the first time I have ever on this channel even talked about the CTA. So how can I misrepresent it? What the common travel agreement is, it's basically it says that British citizens can move across the border within Ireland, absolutely fine, and Irish citizens can also move across it in the other direction or both directions, whatever. No problem at all. And it is agreement that goes back some way. And it is an agreement that was recently re-ratified effectively in February of this year. Obviously, that was Theresa May's government. But Boris Johnson has also alluded to the fact that he doesn't intend to go against it either. So people say, oh, well, here we go. Here's the issue. We're talking about movement across a border in the event of a no-deal Brexit. We're also talking about a Boris Johnson government that says that free movement is going to end on that date as well. And that is completely incompatible with the CTA. And there's two reasons why people attaching any significance to this at all are wrong. The first one is this: a no-deal Brexit is illegal in British law. All right, there's two laws that make it illegal. The easiest one to point this out is the European Union Withdrawal Act, sections 9 and 10. Section 9 basically says we cannot leave the EU until Parliament has agreed on the terms of leaving. And leaving without a deal, it's the same thing. It even specifically says if we're to leave without a deal, Parliament has to vote in favour of that. So for Boris Johnson to take us out without a deal, and Parliament's not going to vote for that, though the only way he can even do it is for Parliament to not decide how they're going to stop him. There's not any number of ways. There are some ways they can stop him. If they can't decide which one it is, then sure, fair enough, maybe Boris Johnson is able to take us out. But it would be against Parliament's will, so it would be illegal. Section 10 also talks about arrangements at the border within Ireland as well, which are not in place, therefore that's illegal as well. Also, there's the Northern Ireland Act, which is the Good Friday Agreement enshrined in British law. It becomes impossible if we leave without a deal to facilitate all aspects of the Good Friday Agreement. Therefore, it's also a breach of the Northern Ireland Act. But it's most explicitly a breach of the European Union Withdrawal Act. So we're talking about a situation in the event of a no deal. They say they want to stop movement. Now, they can't, but that's what they say they want to do. People are now saying, as with this comment and many others did, oh no, but the CTA is there, so it's all fine. So what you're basically saying is, if Boris Johnson breaks the law and takes us out with no deal, then it's fine because the CTA is there, and it's not like he's going to break the law, is it? Really? Try and think about that one a little bit. The second reason is this. So, you've got a chappie wants to cross the border in whatever direction. Okay? Now, if they're Irish, then they're fine to do so according to the Common Travel Agreement. How do you know they're Irish without checking? What if they're French? What if they're German? How can you tell? We don't all have tattoos on our forehead with our nation of origin, do we? So how are you going to tell the difference between someone who, according to the Common Travel Agreement, is allowed to just pass across that border as they like, and someone who is not? without checking. You can't, can you? So the common travel agreement is nice if we're into actually honouring agreements. But if we're not, it's utterly irrelevant because Boris Johnson has to run roughshod over much more serious pieces of legislation. Who's to say he's going to actually honour an agreement between two nations? So no, it is of the utmost irrelevance. The common travel agreement isn't really needed if we maintain that open border within Ireland anyway. And if we don't, then it doesn't help either, is my response to that one. Right, on to the next one. It says, again, Brexit related. This is all way beyond politics. It's almost treasonous or ready for revolution. So these are two things that I constantly rail against. First of all, the use of the word treason or traitor gets bandied about far too much, obviously inaccurately as well. There are certain acts that you could argue technically are because they act against the government. You could argue Boris Johnson threatening to shut down Parliament against its will would be an act of treason. Is it? Is it not? It's a tricky one. But I tend not to use it anyway because it's almost always used inaccurately. At the end of the day, you've got a load of people who think that leaving the EU is best for Britain. So any act they do to pursue that is not, by definition, an act of treason. There are a hell of a lot of us who believe that leaving the EU is very damaging for the country. Therefore, pursuing any path that keeps us in the EU is, again, by definition, not treasonous. The only ones you can even attempt to apply it to are the ones who know full well that leaving is very dangerous, but they're going to do it anyway for personal gain. That one, maybe you could argue, maybe you couldn't. Then there's this idea of revolution is an absolute nonsense. When you get revolutions, it's always against a dictatorship where the people don't have a say. People in this country have a say. The fact that they used that, foolishly is irrelevant. We're not going to have a revolution because we get to go to the ballot box. We've been to the ballot box at least twice this year, or at least once this year with the European elections. Most people also got to go in the local elections early this year. Some people have even got to go to the ballot box in Peterborough and, Brecon and Radnorshire in Wales as well. So, and there may be another general election later this year, in which case we all get to go to the ballot box again. We get to do that. If we choose the wrong person to back, there's no need for a revolution is the most extreme case of a people having had enough with their government, when there's no other recourse to stopping the quagmire that their country has become. And even then, it's an extremely rare thing to ever happen. It does happen every now and then, but we don't need that last resort. We have the ability to go to the ballot box. We have that outlet. Most people don't choose to do it. Are we really going to be talking about a revolution when there's only about 30% of people even bother to go to the ballot box where they can make that difference? No, it's not going to happen. All these threats about civil disobedience, you might get a bit. You're not going to have rioting as a result of not leaving the EU because, those same people who say that they desperately want to leave the EU and they will riot if we don't, are the same people who couldn't be bothered to legally protest. If you can't be bothered to legally protest, then who am I to believe that you will illegally protest and find yourself in jail as a result of it? The only rioting that is likely to occur is as a result of a no-deal Brexit, when people actually see what that means. The government's own report has alluded to this. They've alluded to the risk of rioting within a few weeks of leaving without a deal. And a report which has been absolutely... The notion that it's an old report and is out of date, or the notion that it's a worst case scenario, has also been put to bed. We knew that anyway, but the Sunday Times just, published the whole report so we can actually see that it's this month and not the worst case scenario. It's actually the expected event as well. So that was put to bed. But yeah, those sort of words, I don't use those words because they're not feasible. The treason angle is not really accurately used at all. The English English language has a lot of useful words to use. Let's at least use the right one. And as for revolution, the conditions just don't exist for it. There's no need for it. That's an extreme reaction to something. We have easier ways of changing things. We can change the whole government, pretty much whenever we like. Next one. So a little bit small on this one. Sorry. This is just as a little aside. YouTube has been an absolute pain in the arse. They first of all switched over to a new style analytics. Now they did that over several months so we could get used to it. We were still allowed to use the old ones. They've only just now stopped me using the old ones. All right, sort of got used to it. They've now introduced a new dashboard for doing everything else, including uploading videos and reading comments, and they've got rid of the old one, or the old one no longer works. But the problem is that the new one doesn't work either. It takes me ages to upload videos. It just doesn't work half the time. But it also means that this sort of thing happens. So I'll read it out. It says, it dumbfounds me that this advisory referendum with the slimmest of majorities still stands and represents democracy in the UK. The corruption and gerrymandering around it stinks to high heaven. Where is the political leadership? Where is the free press? There is not even a veneer of honesty left anywhere in the UK. No, it is tricky. I'll take one point at a time. So it's this advisory referendum with the slimmest of majorities still stands and represents democracy in the UK. I mean, the reality is that it doesn't. The referendum is meaningless. Okay. The reason we're leaving is not because of the referendum at all. If it were, then we wouldn't be leaving because the referendum was illegal and the courts would have overturned it and would have had to run it again. And if someone broke the law again, the same thing would happen. It will keep happening until the referendum is carried out in a free and fair way. But as the courts noted, they don't have the power to do that. All they could do was fine the various groups because it was advisory. The government could ignore it. The government should have gone, well, it's illegal. No, we'll rerun it. It was their decision to do that, not the courts. So the reason we're doing this is because Parliament has voted for it, or they've voted to at least begin the process. They've not voted to end it yet, of course. So that does represent democracy in the UK, the fact that Parliament decides these things. Parliament is still deciding these things. At the moment, even though we know that the vast majority of Parliament don't want a no deal, and we know that actually a majority of them don't want to leave at all, the way they're voting is, yeah, all right, then we'll do it for whatever reason, for political reasons, ultimately. So, that's actually valid. That's fine. That's what Parliament's for. Our Parliament is there to decide these things, and Parliament is doing. It's just not doing a very concerted job of it. So we're not actually deciding on anything. Then it says the corruption gerrymander around it sinks to high heaven. Where is the political leadership? First of all, I mean, that is, as I've said many, many times before, that is the key issue. You have a prime minister and the last one as well. And the last one, David Cameron, Theresa May and now Boris Johnson have all been prime minister since the Brexit referendum. None of them have shown any real leadership. And we can attack them on a personal level as much as we like. The fact is, what I mean by that is they have not got Parliament to agree a common position. That's the leadership that's required there. But then there's also the leader of the opposition, who has been the same person throughout all of this, and they haven't shown leadership either because they have not got Parliament to agree a common position either. At least not yet. So really what it's coming down to is which one can first get Parliament to agree upon a common position. Now, Boris Johnson isn't even trying to do that. So I suppose you'd say at the moment Jeremy Corbyn has the best chance because he is at least putting some effort into doing that with his meeting this week. And then as for the free press, well, the press is free. We do have a free press. It's just that they do not take that responsibility. It's like, I hate to do this because this has now become a Spider-Man quote, but in actual fact, the quote existed for centuries beforehand. But with freedom comes responsibility. And the press in this country have a great deal of freedom, but they do not accept the responsibility of that freedom. They subvert it, their role. What we really mean is a press that is holding the government to account. We don't really have that. We have some corners of the press that are trying to do that, and other media as well, like Channel 4 News, for example, who recently said that journalists should call out, when their politicians are lying, they should be called out for lying. And they're not doing that. And occasionally, the media even the media that's not really covering itself in glory do sort of call them out. Like the BBC today, Boris Johnson told yet another lie. He said something about, it's disgraceful that Melton Mowbray pork pies can't be sold in the US, but they're exported to like Thailand and some other place as well. And then, they've basically come back and said, no, we don't export to those places at all. Because he's just making stuff up off the top of his head. And that was the BBC News calling him out on that. So occasionally it does happen. But what they're not doing is saying Boris Johnson lied. Because Boris Johnson lied. It's a bit like he had an earlier statement where, he was talking about all the things that will still be fine. You'll still be able to get, we'll still be able to make chocolate and stuff like that. And yet a senior executive at Mars in the UK said, no, we won't be able to get this and this and this, so we won't be able to make these products in the UK. But as a result of Channel 4 News calling him out on that, Boris Johnson told them to go and travel to the G7 summit and he'll do an interview with them. And then when they got there, he says, yeah, I'm not doing an interview with you, which is just petty and childish. But it's pretty appalling that he won't do that interview. And the reason he won't do that interview is because he will make a statement. They will ask a follow-up question on it. He won't be able to answer it. And they'll keep on at him to answer it. He doesn't want that. He just wants to be interviewed by people who will ask him a question. He'll say a thing, then they'll move on to their next question, regardless of what he said. And then the last one, not even a veneer of honesty left anywhere in the UK. No, and this is the problem. And this applies equally to parties that should be opposing this and are saying they want to oppose it because they're all acting for party political reasons as well. And I mean everyone. The only party I could actually say is definitely not doing that. In fact, there's two. There's the Green Party, but then they have one representative in Westminster. She can't exactly have an argument with herself. And then there's Plaid Cymru as well. To be fair, they're not playing party politics over this. They're in a position. I've said all along they're actually the party that sort of impressed me the most because they're in a position where Wales, voted to leave. They are the National Party of Wales. So by them still sticking to remain, at all costs, they're actually technically going against what the majority of Wales voted for. But, they know that their position is the right one. So they're doing that, and they've stood aside for the Lib Dems at the last by-election. Yes, they weren't going to win it, but they still stood aside. They agreed to that. And they may agree to it in other seats as well. They may benefit from the same arrangement in other seats. Who knows? But, I think for all this, they're the only party that I can say hasn't played party politics on it. Everyone else has. Even the ones, like the Lib Dems and the SNP, who are consistently backing their position, and the DUP, who I suppose backing their position, but it's the opposite position. All of those have also played party politics with it. So you get that on all sides at the moment. This should have been nipped in the bud ages ago. Something should have happened. Either we should have left with the deal or we should have stopped leaving. Because the damage is being done. The not leaving is leaving obviously causes even more damage. But even just the kicking the can down the road is causing permanent, irreparable damage to the UK, and it should have been stopped, and it hasn't been, and it hasn't been because of that party politics. Frankly, those parties should never have voted to trigger Article 50 in the first place. Some of them didn't, by the way. Labour did, shouldn't have done. To say that Labour was saying that they were committed to opposing a Tory Brexit anyway, why the hell did they vote for the Article 50 to be triggered? Why didn't they say, we'll vote for it to be triggered as soon as you tell us what your negotiating position is? Tell us what deal you want. Obviously, that's not necessarily the deal that gets negotiated because the EU 27 get a say as well, but they should have at least said, what is it? But they didn't. Anyway, I'm just rambling now, aren't I? Let's go on to the next one. So, it says, now this one again, you get these sort of silly comments as well. Brexit is an act of aggression against the Irish state. No, it's not. No, it isn't. It is going to do the Irish state harm. Yes. But it's not an act of aggression. It's not deliberate. It's collateral damage. Boris Johnson just doesn't care. The Conservatives don't care. That's not the same thing as an act of aggression. An act of aggression is someone who deliberately intends harm. They don't intend any harm on anyone. They just don't care about people's welfare, that's all. So Scottish independence, with Scottish independence, this will change. No, it won't. Not in the slightest. You know, how will it change? How will it change? First of all, Scottish independence would take several years. Then Scotland joining the EU takes years more. Don't imagine for an instant that if Scotland becomes independent, that it would be able to join the EU straight away. How can it? You know, if Britain leaves, the whole UK leaves, and 2 weeks later everyone realises what a stupid decision it was and we want to get back in, we ain't getting back in. You know, it will take years. It will take an independent Scotland years. Not because of anyone's blocking it, because things have to be done. Negotiations have to take place. We've tried to negotiate leaving the EU, and we can't even get that done after 3 whole years. How many years do you think it takes to negotiate getting in the bloody place? Just research it for other countries where there has been no real objections to them joining in the first place. It takes years. So it won't solve anything. And even when that happens, still, how does that solve anything for Ireland? The issue I was talking about last week with the transport, the problem is that for Irish haulage, freight, to get to certain places in Northern Europe has to go through, I mean, I say go through the UK. What I really mean is go through Wales and England. Going through Scotland doesn't help it. That's just going around to the north. They could go around to the south. Takes too long. You know, that's the issue. It's England and Wales that's in the way, not Scotland. That doesn't help at all. So again, there's no point on either side in just saying things that aren't true. It says the Rump UK, I'm not sure what that means, sorry, by the way, might be missing something there, will then be surrounded by countries within the EU with its trade routes going through EU waters, airways, borders. It will, but again, that's where Scotland's actually buggered as well, because England's also in the way of Scotland getting efficient trade routes through. Doesn't help anyone in the British Isles, whether in or out of the UK, whether they'll be in or out of the UK in 10 years' time, doesn't help anyone for England and Wales, but England, to be out of the EU. You talk about it as if, well, England's screwed and everyone else will be fine. England is screwed, but not everyone else will be fine. It buggers everyone up. This is a lose-lose situation. Brexit is lose-lose for everyone. But unfortunately, some people don't seem to realise that. Where are we next? Here we go. It says, I can't see... Oh, this is about Donald Trump. So I was talking about, obviously, Donald Trump cancelling his visit to Denmark. As someone noted out as well, the only reason he went in the first place, that he was invited, is because he asked to be invited. Much the same way the only reason he came to the UK. It's not that Theresa May was desperate to get him over. There was no political capital over him visiting. You know, it was because he asked to be invited, so he got the invite. It says, I can't see any country inviting him over now, investing millions for an official visit just to have President Smallhands cancelled 2 weeks in advance because he can't have his lollipop. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure some will still invite him if he asks. But, yeah, because the other way I look at it is this. I mean, okay, we know that the way you get anything out of President Trump is to buttering up. You've got to smooth his ego. Got to play the game. But the thing is, even that doesn't guarantee it. You know, you could butter him up and get him to commit to something on that visit, and he'll, you know, so because you'll keep flattering him, he'll say, yeah, because he dishes it out as eagerly as he laps it up. If you tell him he's great, he'll tell you you're great. You know, Boris Johnson, great Prime Minister, because Boris Johnson says that Donald Trump is great. You know, Nigel Farage would be a great ambassador because Nigel Farage says that Donald Trump's a great guy. You know, if you say Kim Jong-un is a great leader of North Korea because he says that Donald Trump's a great president, you know, you butter him up and he'll butter you up. The problem is you can get him to say whatever you want, you know, get him to dance on in the press conference. Then 2 weeks later, he's back home and some other people have whispered in his ear and he's changed his mind. You know, he doesn't keep his word. If he says something, then that's not his bond. So yeah, I actually don't understand why any country is, well, I say any country, obviously I understand why Russia is, because they've got him dancing like a puppet. But generally speaking, any Western democracy, shall we say, I don't understand why any of them would even want to court him anymore, because, you know, even if you get him to say something agreeable, he'll just change his mind straight away after. Or someone else can just offend him with the most innocuous statement or gesture, and he's sulking again. Yeah, I don't understand why anyone wants to invite him over, I have to say. Be interested to see who is the next, you know, Western democracy to invite him over, because I don't understand. I don't even understand why the United States will let him back in when he tries to get back home as well after the G7, but they will. And the last one. So, in terms of Boris Johnson, what he's been talking about recently, says BJ offered nothing, only unicorns instead of solutions. You can't deny a single market and borders at the same time. And that's the key statement for me. In terms of the only unicorns instead of solutions, I mean, that's right. What he's been saying with his little whistle-stop tour of Europe is, you know, we just need some oomph. We can get this done with energy. No, we get this done with diplomacy. That's how it works. You know, and he has offered no solutions. He went to see Donald Tusk even. I think that might be the first time they've met. I've not heard of them meeting before. And Donald Tusk has basically said, you give us some solutions then. You tell us your solution and we'll have a look at it. And he's offered nothing. He's not even trying to claim he's offered solutions, really. So yeah, there's certainly been no solutions. But this second statement is the one that is basically Brexit, isn't it? You can't deny a single market and borders at the same time. And unfortunately, people don't understand this, and I don't understand why. You know, basically the Brexit campaign was this. We are going to get all the benefit, and this isn't me paraphrasing. We're going to get all the benefits of EU membership with none of the responsibilities. When does that statement make sense in any context you can imagine? In what scenario, whether on an individual basis or a national basis, does this ever happen? That you get all the benefits of being a member of anything and none of the responsibilities. You know, at the time, people were likening this to gym membership. If you leave a gym and you stop paying your fee, and you cut up your membership card, you don't get to use that gym anymore. You might get to use it as a non-member and pay every time you go. Well, that was what the EEA was all about. Yeah, okay. But that's not what was talked about. We were talked about, no, we don't have to pay anything. We don't have to do anything. We get no responsibilities, decide everything for ourselves, decide our own rules, but we get full access to it. No, it doesn't matter what analogy you use. There is no realistic analogy that ever makes sense in that context. If you are part of any organisation, no matter how big or small, in a family, you have rules, so you can get on with each other without killing each other. Right? In a community, you have rules. If you join a local club, whether it's a sports club or a games club or a political club, there's a set of rules, common behaviour, so that everyone can get along. You know, you have these everywhere. You know, if you join the European Union, there's a set of rules to agree a common framework so that everyone can get along. And you agree to those rules. You can't stay without agreeing to those rules anywhere in any organisation, no matter how big or small. The fact that people who have experienced this their lives, they've had relationships, you know, you have like your ground rules in relationships so you can get along. You know, they've been members of they've had jobs. You go to a workplace, there's rules. They've joined societies, there's rules. They were at school, there were rules. Every organisation, anyone in this country that was voting has ever been a part of, there were rules. And they understood that there are rules. They might not have agreed with them, but they understood that rules exist. And yet somehow they were convinced to believe that in the largest organisation in the world, the European Union, the largest, most complex organisation that mankind has ever constructed, apparently there are no rules. Or you don't need to obey them. You can still be part of it without obeying those rules, because that makes sense. That ultimately is Brexit to me. That level of thinking. And how do you counter that level of thinking? That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? But anyway, those are this week's little offerings. I hope you found them interesting. If you'd like to comment down below on any of them, then please feel free to do so. If you found the video interesting, then please like and subscribe to the channel as well. Until next time, I'll see you later.